Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Jeffrey Kripal, welcome back to the New School of Commonweal.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. It's good to be back.
Today we're going to talk about your book, Esalen, America and the Religion of No Religion.
Okay.
So for those who really need to start at the beginning, let me ask you, what is Esalen?
Esalen is a place. It's also an institute. It was founded, it really didn't start out as Esalen, it started out as Big Sur Hot Springs, but it was founded in 1962, in the fall of 1962, to bring together a number of things that had not really been brought together, at least in an institute, East and West, and science and spirituality in particular. And it was a kind of talking heads place to begin with. They used Alan Watts' Rolodex to kind of create the vibe, as it were, and it kind of expanded out of there, and it became a place in the 60s and 70s where a lot of somatics or body workers went and were kind of held up in the culture. And it was a place in the culture where there were really just magazines at that point and newspapers, and it became a focal point. Esalen became a focal point of the counterculture and of the spiritual renewal and of Chinese American and then Russian American or Soviet American relations. It became a lot of things in the later decades, but it started out as very much a way to bring these things together, and it's always had a focus on that which cannot be talked about in the churches or the universities. So there's been a constant focus on originally psychedelics in the early 60s, but also parapsychological topics, immortality, healing, these kinds of things that don't get enough attention elsewhere.
Now, who are the founders?
The founders were Michael Murphy. It was his family property, and a gentleman named Richard Price, who was from Chicago. And they founded Esalen for different reasons, but reasons that held together and through their personalities and through some kind of magical alchemy. Dick really came out of the beat culture, came out of a kind of Buddhist, Taoist background, had spent 18 months, I think, in a mental hospital with all kinds of really radical physical treatments that were really designed to essentially beat enlightenment out of him and beat the altered states out of him. And so Esalen early through Dick became a kind of anti-psychiatry healing space. And through Mike's vision was very much around Sri Aurobindo and a kind of bringing together Indian philosophy and sports and Western culture. And Mike founded Esalen really to bring these antinomies together, as it were, or antinomies. So they were founded for different reasons, but they were very much a piece in how they founded. The community eventually started to orbit around, particularly Dick, in 67, 68. Mike moved back to the Bay Area and became kind of the public face and voice of Esalen in the late 60s and 70s. And Dick became the orbit around which the community in Big Sur orbited. Dick was killed by a boulder in the fall of 1985. Fairly mysterious death. No one was present for it, but they found his body the night after it probably happened. He never came back from a hike. It was up the canyon where the water supply comes from for the institute, and he was. There were fires in the mountains. the fall or the months before that, and the idea was that it loosened the boulders, and one of them fell down and broke and struck his head actually, and that's how Dick. So Dick died in '85, and Mike's still very much alive, 96. He's 96 or about to turn 96. So those are really the two intellectual or spiritual places around which the place orbits.
There are many ways to read this book. I have, as you know, been reading all 13 of your books and now rereading them in depth as we continue this set of conversations. But I find Esalen one of the most extraordinary reading experiences. And obviously, it's like a 500-page book and filled with these beautiful short portraits of, I would say, many dozens, if not even hundreds, of brief portraits of people who've been involved with Esalen. I've never found anything that, for me, pulled together so many elements of whatever we want to call the counterculture, East-West, psychology, spirituality, psychedelics, UFOs, so many elements of what's been happening in the culture over the last half century. And for me, it created a sense of coherence among many, many dimensions of my own experience that I had seen as kind of discrete or semi-discrete or in some kind of relationship with each other. But what you've done is to weave them together into a coherent whole. Now, I won't say that's the only whole that they could have been woven together into, since you say, at Esalen, no one captures the flag, and therefore there are any number of ways to tell the story. But with the preface that you've given us here, how did you meet Michael Murphy?
Yeah, well, that's important. It goes back to an earlier episode or an early conversation that you and I had. This was '98. I met Mike. Mike and I spoke in the summer of '98, and then I went out there in November of '98. That was my first visit to Big Sur. This was the depth or the nadir of the assaults on me for Colley's Child in some ways. And what happened is Mike read Colley's Child, I want to say in Santa Rosa, I want to say, and just got so moved by it and so excited by it. And he called me up late one night in the summer of '98, and I knew who he was, and I knew it was an important phone call. And so it was a connection with Colley's Child, actually, that formed our initial interaction. But it was, the way one of the ways I describe Mike is he's the spiritual mentor or friend who put his hand down into the what do you call those things in a war, where you're in a ditch. And I was just trying to stay sane, basically. And Mike put his hand down and lifted me up, and it struck me profoundly that it was the same book that had put me in the ditch that initiated this lifelong friendship.
And I said to you in an email, I could read this entire 500-page book as a love letter to Michael Murphy.
Yeah.
And the two of you have this incredible friendship. I mean, you speak every Sunday with each other.
Yeah.
You spoke to me, you said that's our church.
Yeah, it is.
And so from '98 to 2025, there's been this continuous friendship, which has, and I hadn't realized how profound Michael's influence on your work has been in Esalen. But let me, as I often do, sort of jump right into the heart of it. Uh, and I know this is an impossible question, but I like impossible questions. How do you, if you were to compare and contrast what you brought to Michael, what he brought to you, and how your two patterns of thinking and the evolution of your thinking have woven together, what parts of his worldview became profoundly influential for you? And conversely, how did your worldview help the evolution of his?
Yeah. Yeah, I can speak to both of those. So to speak to the first question first, Mike's influence on me, it's been utterly profound, and on a number of levels. But I would say the big one, to put it in a nutshell, is that he's taught me to think big. He's taught me to see the whole picture. And that really matters because most people don't even think about the big picture. They think about the little details or the little pixels. And Mike does not do that. And he's always relating. The other thing I would say about Mike is that he's always relating these extraordinary experiences to science and to embodiment and to evolutionary biology and to physics. And that's had a tremendous impact on the way I think too, because my guess is that when most people think about altered states or religious states, they think of them as schlock with no relationship to reality. Reality is physical, and altered states are not, or they're quasi-physical, and therefore they don't have. But with Mike, they do, and certainly with me, they do. He has also had a tremendous influence on my thinking because Esalen has become, my joke is it's become a kind of intellectual Disneyland. I can pretty much invite anyone I want to Esalen, and they almost always say yes. They don't always say yes, by the way. Sometimes they turn the invitation down, but it's become for me over the last 27 years, and that happened gradually, by the way. That was not instant. It's become a place where I can host or co-host conferences and bring in intellectuals and really explore things in a way that I can't do in a university or certainly a religious institution. The things that if I can speak to how what I think I've brought to the game is they're in the book. I mean, this basic thesis that what is so powerful about the counterculture and what's been so Esalen's really just a focal point, Michael, for a bigger thing, right? It's this history of alternative spiritual movements in the last 60, 70 years. And there's been this shift, I think, between a kind of disembodied ascetic approach that I call Vedanta to a much more embodied evolutionary panentheism that I call Tantra. And I think that move from the Vedanta to the Tantra has been deeply informative and shaping on Michael in particular. I'm not sure other people understand it or read it or even think about it, but he does a lot. And he also, he talks a lot about altered states in athletics or sports. And that's very much in this move from the Vedanta to the Tantra, because it's all about embodiment and experiencing the transcendent and the immanent. I also bring to Esalen, frankly, I bring a lot of academics. I mean, there's a huge network that intersects here, and I can pick up the phone or email just about anyone and say, hey, can you do this, or can you come here and do this? And they're there. So I think that's been very powerful for Mike. And what we do together, what Mike and I and a man named Charlie Stang, what we do together is something called the Center for Theory and Research, which is sort of, you can think of it as the esoteric Esalen. That's how I think about it. It's not the exoteric Esalen. It's not the public programming that people think about and go to Esalen for. It's it's by invitation only. They're not secret in some kind of sinister way, but they're not publicly advertised usually till after they happen, and that's intentional. It's so that people will talk and people will feel comfortable. There isn't a public there. And so what we do is we run the Center for Theory and Research as a wing or as an esoteric dimension of Esalen. And so I think that's important to say as well. I do teach in the public programming. I teach in what most people think of Esalen, but most of my work is in this Center for Theory and Research, or the CTR as we call it.
And you've been chair of the board of Esalen, so you've been part of the institutional life as well as the public life, and then the esoteric life and the intellectual.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started again coming to Esalen in '98, and the board asked me to join. The book came out in '07. The board asked me to join it probably in 2011 or so. And I said no, actually. And then I was asked again in 2013. And then I thought it was time. I thought it was time to give back. I thought it was time to engage in a kind of an administrative level. And so I joined the board somewhere around 2013 and then became chair of the board from 2015 to 2020. And I'm still on the board. So I care deeply about the place. There are a lot of ways to talk about being on the board, but that's a really an important part of my life.
Mm-hmm. The subtitle of the book is America and the Religion of No Religion. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Well, that comes from a professor named Frederick Spiegelberg, who was Mike's professor at Stanford. He was essentially me at Stanford. He was German, and he fled Germany in the early 40s because of Hitler and the Nazis, and he landed at Stanford. And he was much influenced by Martin Heidegger, who was a philosopher in Germany. And the Religion of No Religion, for me, captures really well this spiritual orientation that later became the New Age, or later became the spiritual but not religious. But Frederick really spoke about it as the religion of no religion. And we should talk about it. It's much, much more than just an anything goes kind of orientation. It's a specific spiritual orientation towards the world religions and towards people who are not religious that I think is still very much with this. And I think it's the future, frankly. I mean, I not only talk about it historically, but I happen to inhabit it. I think it's essentially correct.
Well, say more about that. And let's put it in a certain framework, because you regard well, there are a couple of pieces here. One, I want to ask you, a side piece, is that Harold Bloom has also written influentially in this area.
Yeah.
So I'd love to ask you, as a preface, how Harold Bloom's vision of this compares to or relates to your own. But the deeper question is that you describe this religion of no religion as essentially tantric. And if I understand you correctly, and if it is tantric, you then distinguish between left-handed tantric and right-handed tantric. One is embodied and the other is more sublimated or ascetic or whatever. I'm using very broad brush terms. So, so given that you say it's not anything goes, it's specific, you also describe it as democratic as opposed to the authoritarian structures that have characterized the Eastern religions and gotten them in a lot of trouble when the Dharma came to the West. So I'd love to have you kind of dive into more specifics about the religion of no religion.
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions there. First of all, my orientation is very close to Harold Bloom's.
Right.
I've described myself as a Gnostic intellectual, in a confessed kind of normative way, and that's precisely how he described himself. And Bloom had a series of Gnostic experiences. His family was killed in the Holocaust, and he knew intimately this sort of social justice side of things, but he still believed very much in a kind of Gnostic, by which I mean a kind of personal direct experience of knowing that transcends any cultural context. And I just think he's right about that. I think that's correct. And he applied it to literature, as you know. He did comparative literature and read literature and insisted on people's Gnostic experiences, at least amongst some of the great writers of the Western literary canon. Spiegelberg, by the religion of no religion. So he was deeply influenced by people like Ramana Maharshi, and he certainly knew a lot about Indian philosophy. I wouldn't describe the religion of no religion as tantric per se. Um, what is tantric? I mean, it has to do with. It depends on what you mean in terms of the indigenous South Asian traditions, which are tantric, or the cross cultural fusion that becomes tantra later on through both Western scholars and South Asian intellectuals and practitioners. By this move from Vedanta to Tantra, I don't mean to identify Esalen as a tantric lineage or name a particular tantric guru or set of texts. I mean this move from an ascetic, really anti-world perspective to a perspective that embraces the world and sees evolution, for example, as a positive thing, not as a negative thing. Sees God, if we can speak of God waking up in and as the world. So the world is evolving, moving, changing, but God is changing and moving as well. It's a very Teilhard de Chardin kind of vision, although Chardin himself was not particularly influential in this particular stream. Um, so that's a complicated thing. I think the tantric influences are very obvious in the counterculture through things like Kundalini yoga and things like Zen and things like Swami Muktananda, for example. Things that are coming over and influencing the counterculture in a very dramatic way are essentially tantric. And the older Asian traditions or the older South Asian traditions that were also really important were much more in this Vedantic kind of mode where the world is an illusion and they're more idealist in orientation. And I'm not dismissing those. I'm just saying that's not what the counterculture became, and that's not what these spiritual movements why they worked the way they did. That, let me put this in different terms. So I was once asked to debate with an evangelical intellectual at Rice, and the topic was something like, "Is heaven's doors shut?" In other words, what do we do with the exclusivism of the religions? And it's not just Christianity, by the way, that's exclusive. It's like most religions are socially exclusive by at least by their development or nature. And I set out these models of exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. And basically, exclusivism is the position where you exclude the other religious viewpoint based on your own categories. So someone doesn't accept Jesus as Lord and Savior, therefore they're not going to heaven, or they are not Jewish, therefore they are not of the elect, or they're not part of the covenant, or they have not reached enlightenment and therefore they'll need to be born again. I mean, there are different ways to do this. Inclusivism is the position that the other religious or cultural position is affirmed, but again, still on one's own terms. And the funny example of this is, it comes from this this film series I used to use where there was this old retired English theater director, and he was with these women in Sri Lanka, and they were joking with him, and they were saying, well, you're obviously a good Christian in this life, and if you're really good, you'll be born a Buddhist in the next. So it's a way of including the other, but you kind of knock it down a bit. It's still in your own categories, and sometimes it's a reincarnation model, but sometimes it's a Christian model, sometimes it's a Jewish model. There's different ways to do this. Pluralism is the position that there are different ways up the mountain, as it were, and we don't really know what this ultimate reality is, and these are all cultural approximations. And what I did in this talk, which I called the chess game, basically what I said is, well, if you're going to play this game, someone's going to win and someone's going to lose. What if you don't want to play that game anymore? What if you just want to stand up from the chess game and say, no more, I'm not doing this anymore? And I think that's what the religion of no religion is. I think it's standing up from the chessboard and from the chess game and saying, I'm not part of this. I'm not an exclusivist. I'm not an inclusivist. I'm not even a pluralist. I don't like your game because people are winning and losing, and people are suffering because of this game you're playing. And I think that's the religion of no religion. And it doesn't mean there isn't there isn't some kind of transcendent truth or source, but it means that transcendent or truth or source is not privileging a particular religious or human community or culture.
There's a passage in your conclusion where you say, I can only marvel at how rare a fully embodied, truly democratic, erotic spirituality is.
Right.
How such a hope or dream still lies very much in the future. No major religious tradition of which I am aware has ever been able to develop religious ideas and practices that affirm the radical integrity and freedom of each and every individual without then immediately compromising that integrity and freedom with any number of hierarchical beliefs about the authority of tradition, about the subordination of women, about the literal truth of Scripture, about the impurity of sex and food and blood, about male omnipotence, male judgment, male mercy, about salvation from, devotion toward, and obedience to the divine male, and so on. So that gives a flavor, I think, to what you're saying, that nobody's pulled that off.
Nope.
And there are other places. I remember a line of yours that says religions are a lie.
Yeah. I think that's true, and that's why it's the religion of no religion. It's not us bowing down to some previous belief. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to play your game. But that response then, Michael, that results in a kind of loneliness and a kind of, okay, well, how do we form community then? And what is the future of these orientations look like? And secularism, I'm not arguing for secularism either, by the way. It's just another belief system. I think there's something deeper and more cosmic about the future than just flatland secularism or rationalism or scientism. But it's not a rejection of religion or science. It's sort of like these are half truths. It's not that they're wrong. It's that they're not fully right. And I think that makes a really big difference and sort of orients one towards the past in a really different way.
You know, I mentioned to you in an email that one of the things that happened to me as I read Esalen, as it became evident that Sri Aurobindo was so central to Michael Murphy from Spielberg, and how, Murphy had actually spent time in the Aurobindo ashram and also been discouraged by some of its practices, its authoritarian practices. But that, if I understand correctly, that for him, Esalen, that he made a vow as a young man to devote his life to Aurobindo's, the evolution of Aurobindo's vision in his own life. Is that correct?
I think that's fair. I don't think Mike. I think as Mike's life went on, it became less and less Aurobindonian, as it were, because the problems with that traditional positioning became more and more apparent, particularly around this exclusivism or these cult-like behaviors, as he calls them. So. But that vision of an evolution, what he calls an evolutionary panentheism, really has stuck with Mike, and it's certainly at the core of what I do as well. I mean, in other words, that God is the universe, but God's more than the universe, and it's evolving, it's changing, and so are we. And there's no stability here. There's nothing, but that's a good thing. I hope what we call a human isn't us in 1,000 or 10,000 years. I hope it's something else. I hope it's something better.
You speak of Michael seeing what we are now, that we're a transitional species.
Yeah.
So that we're becoming, and that part fits with Aurobindo.
It does. No, Aurobindo is wonderful Aurobindo was reading a lot of, I'm sure he was reading a lot of Darwin, and evolutionary biology was deeply informative to his vision, but he wasn't a Darwinian in a kind of random sense, in the sense that Darwin was, that evolution works through what later became called mutations in a kind of random or meaningless way, so that things can survive, so that species can survive and reproduce. There was an intention, or there was a meaning to this process as well. And so that, I think that's where this evolution or this change becomes really really powerful as a religious idea, because change and metamorphosis and what historically was called salvation were key to religious systems early on. But what Darwin did in the late 1850s and then 1860s was sort of change that conversation. And then the religious communities or traditions had to choose whether to see material reality as part of this transformation or step back from it and separate entirely. Mm-hmm. And Aurobindo was one of the major Indian thinkers who said, no, we have to embrace this materiality, this embodiment, this process. And reincarnation, by the way, you see this fusion really of evolutionary theory and reincarnation, I think, in someone like Aurobindo that certainly exists in other thinkers of the time, but it's really a modern kind of synthesis. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying you don't really get that until post-Darwin, and the West, Europe knows something about these Asian religions, which they didn't know much in the 1850s, by the way. They knew some things, but not a lot of things.
There are so many major themes, Fritz Perls, Schultz, encounter work, the varieties of encounter work, Murphy's Golf in the Kingdom. You've got a chapter called Jacob Adabet and the Tantra of Physics. Jacob Adabet is one of Murphy's surrealistic novels. One of the things that really struck me is, I thought of Murphy in many ways. I knew he'd written some books. I actually read Jacob Adabet. I tried to read The Future of the Body, but didn't get through it. But you make the case, and I'm not sure a lot of people see this, but that Murphy is intellectually an extremely serious human being. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure a lot of people see that. Now, do I just not move in the right circles to understand how serious in the history of intellectual thought, as it hopefully will be read 50 years from now, Michael Murphy is? Or is that widely appreciated in the culture?
No, it's not widely appreciated. And why one of the reasons I dwell so long on his works of fiction is that they're actually not entirely fiction.
Right.
Um, Mike has this phrase, mystical realism, and
Right.
so you write about things, you write fiction around people's actual experiences, and I just think that's actually correct about a lot of science fiction and about a lot of fantastic literature. We tend to dismiss it as, oh, this is just fiction or entertainment, but it's actually not. And the founder of my own lineage, by the way, my own intellectual image, Mircea Eliade, was basically a literary figure in Romania, and was as committed to fantastic literature as he was to scholarship. And his argument was that you can express some things nocturnally through the imagination and literature that you can't really express diurnally through reason and academic scholarship. And I just think that's correct. I mean, I think that's the way human beings work. And the other thing I had to do when I wrote this book, my joke is there are two criticisms of the book. One is it's I'm not in there. And by I'm not in there, I don't mean me. I mean, whoever's speaking to me. I'm like, yeah, I didn't write about you. No, as you're not in there. And the other criticism is it's way too long. And I'm like, well, don't those cancel each other out? I mean, so that's just a joke. But I had to create a thread. I had to create a story. And Mike was that story. And he was that story because he was one of the two founders, and he wrote a lot. I had a historical record, and I knew him personally, and he could read this stuff and tell me, okay, Jeff, this is what you have right about me. This is what you have wrong about me. So it was a fantastic kind of experience where I could like bounce off my writing with the historical figure and really see what this person was going to say, And Dick, the thing about Dick is there's quite a bit of Dick Price in the book as well, but Dick did not write books. And he was a somatic, really a psychotherapeutic practitioner. And by its very nature, those practices don't use the written word in the same way. And so they're harder for a historian to grok, as it were. I'm not saying they're not possible. Yeah, they're totally. You can write about them, but it's harder. And so Mike was and I say that in the introduction of the book. Mike was definitely my way into Esalen, but I did privilege that side of the Esalen story. There's no question about that.
Well, it is not only. I mean, the thing about your writing in general is that you write long. I mean, that's how you write. You write long.
Right.
But the problem with it is that, as you know, I'm a reader. That's what I do. But most books that I read, there's a good deal that I can skim.
Yeah.
But in your books, I can't. There are very few paragraphs that I can ignore.
Yeah.
So at least for me, I find myself drawn into a close reading of these 500-page books, and it's a lot of work. I mean, in a joyful sense, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So that, and I wonder actually, because I really do see you. I mean, you know this, that I've said to you that reading your work is transforming me. It is, as you say, transformation. It's a textual transformation. It's a textual thing. The books are changing me. I am different from doing this reading. So, of course, I'm reading carefully because I want to change carefully. I want to there are so many amazing people here, but I want to go to Terence McKenna.
Okay, yeah. Can I speak to that first, though, before we go to Terence? Of course, I love talking about Terence McKenna, but this was years ago, decades ago now. I used to be asked all the time, well, what is your practice? I was asked that at Esalen. I think I've told you this joke. Mm-hmm. And, my response was always, oh, that's easy. I write. And they would just look at me like, that's not a practice. They wanted to hear some kind of yoga or some kind of meditation. And I was like, no, no, books right, first of all, to me, paranormal phenomena are all about communication.
Right.
They use words literally, and they're about words. And therefore, words can have a paranormal or mystical function as well. It goes both ways. And I see books, one of the things I often say is, look, I spend every morning writing. And the reason I do is I'm going to be dead soon, whether that's tomorrow or 10 years from now or whatever. But um, these books, they can work with people all around the world, and I don't even have to be alive. I mean, this is real work. This is real spiritual work. And I mean that. That's not just me blabbing. That's like, and I see this. I see it every single day. I get tons of emails from readers. I can't answer them all, Michael, but they're clearly speaking to people, and they're clearly helping people work through their extraordinary states. And of course, sometimes they don't give answers, but it's because I don't have answers. It's like, no, listen to your experience. Don't come to me for your answer. So anyway, writing is transmission for me. Writing is mutation, as I say. Reading is a really weird, uncanny spiritual process. It can be. I understand that some reading is banal, and we read cereal boxes and stop signs and things like that. But we also read really books that change us.
Yeah, and for me, I try to be careful about what I read because I see it as the furnishing of my mind.
Right.
So
it is.
I don't want a lot of clutter and detritus in my mind. So I try to be careful about what it is.
That's why libraries are so great, because you can see the soul, you can see what the person has engaged or not.
Exactly. So Terence McKenna.
Yeah, let's talk about Terence.
What about him?
Oh, there's so much to say there. I mean, so Esalen was very important to Terence McKenna, and Timothy Leary was at Esalen and was very much influential on the counterculture as a whole, as everybody knows. But it was really Terence that took that mantle in the 80s and 90s and became really the spokesperson, particularly for mushrooms and for ayahuasca, or what became ayahuasca, or DMT. And Esalen has been involved in that psychedelic conversation from 1962 on. The very first seminars were actually on psychedelics, and here, where this is the book right here. This is the first edition of Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception, 1954, whatever. And why that book's so important and why that conversation is so important is, again, people just think of these as drugs, and that, it's you're seeing shit on drugs. And what Huxley argued was that actually, no, the mescaline, or the psychedelic, and he coined the word with Humphrey Osmond, is what opens up the person to reality. And there's something about the real coming through that doesn't otherwise come through. And what Terence did is he took that insight, and he was a great writer. Oh my God, he was a great writer. And he was a great speaker. And he applied it to Latin America and to Latin American shamanism and to DMT, which is a different kind of psychedelic for sure, and a kind of molecular technology. And he became the popularizer, really, of this worldview. And it was very much also Esalen that functioned as a kind of secret place where the psychedelic activists and teachers could come and think about their next move, as it were. For those of you who don't know Terence McKenna's work, he became famous for a lot of things. One of them is called the ancient, or no, I'm sorry, the alien mushroom hypothesis. And this was essentially the idea that, or the stoned ape theory. This was essentially the idea that monkeys were popping everything they could get their hands on, and they eventually popped a mushroom which grew on cow pies, and boom, there's consciousness, and so we then become hybrids of essentially monkeys and mushrooms that grow on cow pies. And so there's a kind of humor here. But that idea is like weirdly plausible. It's like, yeah, I can see that happening. I can see how that happened. So anyway, and then Dennis is still alive. Dennis, Terence's little brother, has written about Terence, has written about this period, and is himself very much an intellectual and a writer in this particularly this DMT space as well, which has become the psychedelic renaissance, and it goes on and on. Michael Pollan, and it just goes. And by the way, I just finished this book.
Oh yes, which we wrote together. Yeah.
And Death by Astonishment, of course, is a Terence McKenna line, and so. And it feeds into, in my world, ontological shock and abduction phenomena and a kind of moving into another dimension. And oh my God, these things are real. These beings, these entities are physical, and I can't see this anymore as just a feature of the mind or the imagination. So I think this whole renaissance or revolution continues.
Yeah, the book that you just described, Death by Astonishment, which I read as well, he basically carefully reaches the conclusion that DMT can take you to a place which is not a hallucination, but a parallel reality.
Yeah.
That these entities have I want to read just to give our listeners a sense of your own writing. He said, McKenna had a very distinct and developed theory of altered states of history that strongly resembles the synchronistic model with which we began our own journey. And then you talk about his history and how he read Doors of Perception. I remember following my mother around the kitchen, telling her that if 1/10 of what this guy was saying was true, this is what I wanted to do with his life. So he took LSD in Berkeley, where he was studying art history. He went to Nepal and so on, and got involved with the Bon tradition, which the Buddhists described. And then these tantric beginnings are particularly evident in a chapter of True Hallucinations. Kathmandu Interlude, which is the chapter, which McKenna glosses with one of his amazing subtitles, in which a flashback to tantric excesses in the head nests of hippie Asia illuminates strange mushroom experiences at La Correra. He relates the trip he took with LSD and DMT on the winter solstice of 1969. It began the usual way. I heard a high-pitched whine and the sound of cellophane ripping as I was transformed into the ultra-high frequency orgasmic goblin that is a human being in DMT ecstasy. Later, he made love to a female acquaintance who had joined him on the roof. Or rather we had, quote, or rather we had an experience that vaguely related to making love, but there was a thing in itself. Basically, his friend was transformed into a Jungian tantric goddess. She became pure anima, Kali, Leosithia, something erotic but not human, something addressed to the species and not to the individual, glittering with the possibility of cannibalism, madness, space, and extinction. She seemed on the edge of devouring me. Within this, begin, quote, fucking at the very limit of what is possible. Everything was transformed into orgasm and visible, chattering oceans of elf energy. whenever their genitals met, there flowed out of the tantric goddess and over McKenna and everything else some sort of obsidian liquid, something dark and glittering, with color and lights within. McKenna would later speculate this was the magical substance that would focus many of his later speculations, the translinguistic matter, the living opulescent excrescence of the alchemical abyss of hyperspace, perhaps generated by the sex act itself. So I just read that paragraph because McKenna's a good writer, but so are you, my friend.
Oh, thanks.
And part of what makes you an extraordinary writer is that a lot of it is quite scholarly, and then it's punctuated with these descents into, what D.H. Lawrence did with Lady Chatterley's Lover, where you get down to the core early Anglo-Saxon words that carry such power when discreetly placed.
Yeah, I mean the F word there. I think that's actually Terence. I think I got away with that because I was quoting Terence. And yeah, you've got to use vulgarity selectively. I'll put it that way, because then it's most effective. If you use it just randomly, it's not very effective.
Oh, it isn't. So I want to go back to Aurobindo. He's important to me for many reasons, because I spent a decade around Swami Satchidananda, who had an integral yoga, but I didn't realize that Satchidananda spent a decade at the Aurobindo ashram, and then he went with Swami Shivananda, who he credited as his guru. And as you know, all the gurus who come west get into trouble of one kind or another. What happened to Satchidananda? Again, the erotics was for so many of them the challenge. But what I really hadn't fully realized before, and it's widely recognized, is how incredibly important Aurobindo is for a lot of people in the history of religion.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, how connected with Aurobindo were you before you met Michael Murphy?
Not at all.
All right. And so when you came into Murphy's early but continuing engagement with the Aurobindo tradition, was that influential to you?
Well, okay, so I should back up a bit. So I was deeply embedded in that Bengali tantric
Right.
lineage, but it predates Aurobindo.
Right.
It's really in the 1800s, in the early 1900s. Aurobindo is really writing in the teens and in the 20s up to about the middle of the 40s of the 20th century. He's deeply embedded in that Bengali tantric tradition, but he's much more. He's also educated in Cambridge, and he's speaking to the West, as it were, as well. So there's a kind of fusion of India and Europe that I think was very powerful. So I was Mike and I called it the Bengali connection. We were definitely embedded in that worldview, but I hadn't really read any Aurobindo. Mike asked me to and gave me books, which I then read, and I certainly got to know the text inside and out through him, but they were not influential on me before that. No.
Was there any influence? In other words, when I started looking at your very extraordinary website, I was a bit put off by all the super language,
Yeah.
the super normal, the super this, the super.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I thought it was wrong. I thought it was a popularization, but the word super, for whatever reason, doesn't speak to me. I don't have the history with Superman and the superhero comic that you had growing up. But what I realized was that super was a core word for Aurobindo.
It was. It definitely was.
So when I now think about your use of the word super as a linguistic, mantle over a lot of your work. And I've said this to you. There's the Aurobindo connection. There is your innovation, which is the superhero comics. There's Nietzsche, who, as you, I think, rightly said, is misread. And so, and then there's your own work.
And then, to go further back though, Michael, the whole language of the hyper or the super in Greek, it's ancient, it's Greek, it's very Greek, it's very pseudo-Dionysius. Super is everywhere through the entire mystical Christian mystical tradition. I don't even know how you talk about the Christian mystical tradition without talking about the super. I have no idea. I don't know how you do it. So to me, this sort of the sort of pop cultural super is building on this much more ancient and much more established Christian mystical ancient Greek hyper or super as well, and it's all embedded. I wrote an essay once. I should send it to you. It's called "How We Got to Super," and it doesn't reach back into the ancient world, but it focuses on people like Charles Fort and the alien abduction phenomena, but it makes this argument that super is much more complex and richer than people imagine it is.
Well, that's really helpful to me, because for whatever linguistic reasons, and I'm sure that super works well for your students and for a whole lot of reasons, I don't understand my own linguistic catch about that. I wish there was another word.
So give us another word. I'm not attached to that word, but it is the word that draws people in. And so I use it. I use it as a writer. And, it goes back, I think I've shared this story with you, this story when I was a kid fishing with my dad. And my dad said to me, well, I was like 5. He was like, and I wanted to use the glowy rubber, fluorescent worms. He's like, Jeff, you got to use the bait that the fish want, not the bait that you want. And I was like, oh, okay. And that has stuck with me this whole time,
But don't you, I think you like the word super.
I do. But I like it because of this longer history.
Wow.
By the way, there's no Charles Fort without super. You cannot speak of Charles Fort. Super, he probably uses it in 40 or 50 different words. And he uses it over and over again because it's so darn relevant to what he's talking about.
No, I hear that. And anyway, I think what this is, again, it's part of the transmission. I need to go through my own struggle to find my way to.
Well, I think people struggle with super because of the Nazis, frankly, and because of the whole European hang up around that. And I just think it's irrelevant to a lot of this. I think it's there. We need to struggle with that. But I'll just give you another example. When the French invented this word paranormal, they were riffing on the English supernormal. That's what they were riffing on.
Uh-huh. See, paranormal, I have no problem with.
Well, a lot of people have a problem with that.
I know that.
Yeah, but it's just it's a French riff on supernormal.
Yeah, I get it.
And supernormal was a riff on supernatural. It didn't mean supernatural. It meant something else. But so there's this long riffing, and my experiment with different words. I mean, I'm not attached to the paranormal or the super, but I'm talking about the impossible, and I'm talking about the superhumanity. It just keeps inventing words because that's what writers do. I think that's what poets do too. It's certainly what Terence McKenna did.
Right. So let's come back to this amazing book. I found one of the things I found in this book was that you were putting into practice and action in telling this story your whole theoretical framework.
Yeah.
And that, the previous books that I'd read, and having gone through all of them now, somehow they came together as tools here
Yeah.
and you were weaving them through. And I think, what fascinates me most deeply is that for me, you are helping me rediscover something I've had an intuition about for 50 years and had many of the uh, tools for, but I didn't have them as a coherent whole. So I wonder in the culture, we're still living in the elite level, the science, the secular humanities, secular science thing, uh, in a materialist paradigm. But that materialist paradigm, we both know, has sprung about 25 different leaks, whatever the number is, in physics and the psychedelics, the UFO stuff, all these different leaks. And when you go into the public sphere about what people actually believe and their lived experiences, they're so much closer to where you are than the materialist paradigm.
Yeah.
But the materialist paradigm is still the dominant paradigm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is your experience of our collective trajectory from the materialist paradigm to whatever we want to call the transcendent transmission? How are we doing as a species and as a culture in the race between destroying ourselves and finding this greater reality?
Well, first of all, I don't think we're doing very well.
Yeah.
But one of the things I often observe a lot is, well, the culture produced Michael Lerner and Jeffrey Kripal too. So it has this ability to transcend itself, to reflect back on itself, and to move forward. But it also, produces political ideologies that are devastatingly stupid, and exclusive and hateful, and it produces ecological disaster and nuclear threat, and it does all kinds of horrific things. And at the same time, it produces tricksters and academics and spiritual activists, and so it can do both. And so I'm ultimately an optimist, Michael, as you know. And part of it is a practical conviction that if you're an optimist, the future is likely going to be positive, and if we baptize pessimism, then the future is likely going to be bad. So there's a kind of magical conviction in that is very real. On the other hand, I think this is my own belief now. I do think that the arc of justice bends towards justice, as it were. I think there is an impulse in the universe that bends towards life and intelligence and consciousness. And is it absolute? No. Is it quote unquote winning? No. It's actually losing. But is it there? Yes, it's really there. And so that and our lives and our cultures and our histories are not that relevant, if I can put it that way. One of the definitions of hydrogen, which I like, which did I quote this already? I don't even remember. There's this wonderful definition of hydrogen. It goes like this: a light, odorless gas that, given enough time, turns into people.
Oh, yeah, right. I do remember that.
I was like, okay, there it is. It's like, what the hell? Why does this light, odorless gas turn into people? There's something about the cosmos that produces consciousness, that produces you and me. And so that's where I put the chips, ultimately. But is this particular culture? No, it's not. Michael, but it hasn't been for a long time. Certainly not in my life. When I was a kid in the 70s, 60s and 70s. I used religion to object to the culture. And now I use the religion of no religion to object to the culture. But it's very consistent kind of rejection of the broader public culture, which has been really bad for a really long time.
When you say you hope the cosmos bends toward justice, and we've talked about that before, and I profoundly share that hope. But here's a hypothesis that I've mentioned to you before that I'd like to review again. As I've read your work, I've more and more concluded that the cosmos is, far from being alone, the cosmos is shot full of spirits and intelligences, incarnate, disincarnate, never incarnate, that have many, many different agendas. And some of them wish us well, hope we will become a mature planetary civilization or interplanetary. Some of them want to treat us as food. Some of them have other nefarious goals for us. Some of them are completely indifferent. But could it not be that the anthropic principle, that the only cosmos that we can observe, seems perfectly designed to support life? But having said that, the cosmos may be quite indifferent to the fates of all the different intelligences and species that this life-affirming cosmos has created. So in that view, as above, so below, that here we are on this planet of angry apes with all of these different species, both antagonistically and synergistically competing with each other or collaborating. So maybe it's the same at the cosmos level. And maybe there is a cosmic indifference to which species end up being There's a beautiful essay by the great naturalist E.O. Wilson called "Is Mankind Suicidal?", in which he asked whether we wouldn't have been better off if the dominant species hadn't turned out to be some kind of giant ant. Well, when you look at the UFO experiences, all these praying mantises that show up, right? It could well be that the cosmos actually favors more intrinsically collaborative species, that's in their DNA.
Yeah.
And that we got DNA that makes it a lot more difficult. And so if we ask Einstein's question, is the cosmos ultimately friendly or not? Yes, it's friendly to life, but it may not be friendly to humans.
Yeah.
It may be more friendly to species that are able to evolve further because they are intrinsically collaborative. So what's your take on that hypothesis?
Well, first of all, I don't identify human with this body or with this particular species.
Okay.
It's more like life or consciousness. And to go to Einstein for a second, what he was most awed by was the fact that the universe is intelligible at all. So he certainly was not. It wasn't an anthropocentric kind of view, but it was definitely a ratiocentric or a physics-centric kind of view of the universe. And if the insectoid knows more about physics, then why not? Absolutely. But again, I was schooled originally in a Hindu or South Asian worldview in which reincarnation was just assumed. And by reincarnation, I don't mean a balloon floating between human beings. I mean you're moving through all these species, and and life is not restricted to a human body. And so I don't, much of my response to a lot of, to this book in particular that I held up earlier, to Andrew, and to a lot of the ontological shock is, I'm not shocked. It's kind of a duh. It's like, yeah, I mean, I told you so. Why weren't you listening? And does that mean I've experienced it, or that I would? Of course, I would be shocked if I entered another dimension and I encountered a physical. Of course, I'm not denying that. But does that surprise me intellectually or historically? No, it doesn't. And so that's what I'm trying to get at with these different categories, like the religion of no religion, or the mutants, or abduction experiences, is that sort of bigger cosmic vision of things. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that helps, but that's certainly what
Oh, it certainly helps. Well,
Yeah.
we're coming to the end here, Jeff. Any reflections on the book, on our conversation that you'd like to end with?
Well, so I did first of all, if you want your ego smashed, go on a book tour. It's a great way to destroy or annihilate an ego. So I went on a book tour when this book came out. A donor gave us some money, and the number one question. First of all, I went all around the country. It was one of the most depressing things I've ever done, though, Michael. Just don't do it. This was early Amazon, by the way, and all these bookstores were closing. So the owners were distraught and depressed. But the question I got asked the most often was, how do we do this again? And my answer was, and it's still my answer. My answer is, you can't. You've got to wait. You've got, the zeitgeist has to be right. But one of the things I learned writing this book was a lot of these ideas that became so prominent in the 60s had been around for decades. These people had been saying these same things. Aldous Huxley, he'd been saying those things for decades. And suddenly there was a youth culture that would listen to him, and it embraced him, and it took him up, and it ran with a lot of his ideas. And so this alchemical fusion between a youth culture and intellects or writers, I think, is really the secret of a lot of this. But it also goes to this question of, how do we do it again? And if you consciously try to do it, or you're not going to do it. It's not going to be there. But if you focus on the ideas, and you keep talking about them and advancing them, eventually younger people are going to come around to those ideas. And that's my hope. And again, that may be wrong, Michael. I may be totally wrong about that. But I don't know what else to do.
When I talk to people, as I often do, about being immersed at age 81 and reading your 13 books and talking with you about them, and allowing them to transform who I am, which is, I'm awfully grateful to have experienced this transformation while I'm still in this body. But what I often say to them now is, if you want the simple introduction to Jeff's work that doesn't freak out too many people, read the flip. If you want the latest incarnation of the work, How to Think Impossibly is the book. But if you want to understand the culture of the left coast, and by extension the United States, in terms of the fusion of the counterculture and the coming of the Dharma to the West, as Toynbee said, and you want to put together all the pieces of what we've lived through, that Esalen is the book to read.
Yeah.
And yes, it's long because the story is long.
It's much longer than I tell.
Right. And you've done the most extraordinary thing. And I'm really saying to all my friends who care about understanding the culture, as we do at Commonweal, you really have to read Esalen to.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. It is a hymn to all of these stories and all of these movements. And I don't think that book does it either, by the way. I think it's too big a book or too big a story to be in one book or even a number of books, but it's definitely, that's the attempt.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well, Jeffrey Kripal, thank you for being back with us at the new school, and
Yeah.
we'll meet again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Michael.
Don't take it, don't. 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 Don't take it, don't.